I was only 12 years old when my father first spoke of the new music school in Prague, the one built in 1892 with such pride, yet shadowed by whispers of its empty concert hall. Father was a violin maker, his workshop filled with the smell of varnish and cedar, and he believed no city could truly live without music. He told me that the school was meant to rival Vienna's conservatories, a place where young Czechs would rise and prove that Prague was not just a city of bridges and beer, but of symphonies and sonatas. I remember walking with him one cold March morning, the cobblestones still damp from melted snow, my boots too thin to keep out the wet. The school stood at the end of a narrow street, an imposing building of pale stone, its windows tall and arched, like frozen notes on a stave. On the facade, chiseled into the stone, were the words Hudební škola národnictví, the music school of national honor. Yet for all its grandeur, the doors were closed, and no sound spilled from the halls. My father frowned. He had heard from other craftsmen that, though the classrooms were filled with eager students, the grand hall itself remained unused. Some said it was cursed, that a benefactor who died before its completion had promised to return if the first concert was ever held. Others whispered it was simply pride that kept it closed, jealous directors arguing over which master should be the first to christen its stage. For me, it was only a building. But there was something about its silence that unsettled me. Music is not meant to be still. Even I, with my childish bow scratching against gut strings, knew that much. The first time I saw the inside was by accident. My father had been summoned to repair a cracked cello belonging to a teacher, and I carried his tools in a wooden box. A caretaker, a thin man with eyes like ink stains, opened the door. He led us past staircases lined with portraits of composers, Smetana, Dvořák, and even Beethoven, as if his spirit had wandered into our Czech school by mistake. Their painted eyes seemed to follow us. When we reached the hall, my breath caught. It was vast, larger than any church I had ever entered. A ceiling, painted with frescoes of angels holding harps stretched high above us, and crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain. The stage gleamed with polished wood, wide enough to hold an orchestra of 100 players. Rows upon rows of velvet seats waited in silence. Yet the emptiness made it eerie, as if the air itself longed for a sound that never came. Father worked on the cello while I wandered. I imagined what it would be like if the hall were alive with music. I pictured the rustle of gowns, the hush of an expectant audience, the conductor lifting his baton. My heart pounded as though I could almost hear the strings tuning, the flutes whispering their first notes. But there was nothing. Only my own footsteps echoed back. That night, I dreamed of the hall. In the dream, I was sitting alone in the front row when the chandeliers flickered to life. Shadows moved across the stage, musicians without faces, playing instruments that gave no sound. Their bows rose and fell, their fingers pressed invisible keys, but the silence was complete. I awoke with my chest heavy, as though I had swallowed the weight of their missing music. In the weeks that followed, I began asking questions. The other boys in our quarter laughed at me. "Who cares about an empty hall?" they said. "Better to sneak to the river and fish." But I could not stop thinking about it. At the shoemaker's, I overheard an old man say the school had opened too late. By the time it was finished, most of Prague's wealthiest patrons were already sending their children to Vienna, leaving our hall unwanted. Another said the students had performed once in secret, but the sound had been so poor that the directors locked the doors in shame. Still others muttered about debts, and that the school was built with money that never truly belonged to those who gave it. Each rumor seemed to make the silence heavier. One evening, Father returned from the tavern with news. "They say the directors will open the hall at last," he told Mother, his voice thick with beer. "A spring concert with the students playing Dvořák's works. If it happens, boy, we'll go. I hardly slept that night. My imagination soared with possibilities. Perhaps I would hear the Slavonic dances thunder through that chamber, or the mournful strains of Stabat Mater. Perhaps in some secret way, the music would awaken something that had slept since the stones were first laid. But as spring passed, nothing happened. The hall remained dark. The promised concert never came. Father grew bitter, saying the directors had quarreled again, each refusing to yield the honor of the first performance. Still, I could not give up. I began visiting the school alone, standing outside its iron gates after my lessons. The caretaker sometimes noticed me and shook his head, muttering in Czech that I should go home. But once, when the sun was setting and the windows glowed like molten glass, he stopped to speak. "You want to know why it stands empty, boy?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded. "Because no one is brave enough," he said. Then he turned away before I could ask more. That word, brave, echoed in my mind. What courage could music require? It was only sound, only the drawing of bows. Across strings, the breath into brass, the hammering of piano keys. Yet perhaps he meant something else, something hidden. The more I thought of it, the more I felt that the hall was waiting, not for directors, not for patrons, but for someone willing to break its silence. And so I began to imagine myself upon that stage, violin in hand. I could see the rows of empty seats stretching before me, but in my mind I played to them as if they were full. I practiced in Father's workshop, my bow trembling, the wood shavings on the floor serving as my invisible audience. Every squeak, every missed note I corrected with the thought that one day the hall might hear me. By summer, I had decided, I would not wait for directors, nor for quarrelsome masters. If no one else would play to the empty hall, then I would. What I did not know, as the heat pressed down upon Prague and the Vltava River gleamed like bronze, was how deeply that choice would change the course of my life and how many secrets the hall itself still held within its silent walls. The decision to play inside the hall was not one I could announce. Who would believe me? A thin boy with calloused fingers and second-hand shoes. Even Father, who loved music more than most, would have thought it madness. So I kept the thought, tucked inside me like a hidden note in a score, waiting for the right moment to sound. The chance arrived one evening in late July. The streets of Prague were heavy with the scent of horse sweat and warm bread, the air buzzing with flies. Father had gone to deliver a finished violin to a wealthy merchant, and Mother was mending linens by candlelight. I slipped out with my own battered instrument, the bow wrapped in cloth to hide it, and walked the crooked lanes toward the school. When I reached the gate, the caretaker was nowhere to be seen. The building loomed against the deepening sky, its windows reflecting the last traces of sun. I pressed my face against the iron bars, heart hammering, when I noticed something glinting in the dust near the wall. It was a key, old, tarnished, heavy in my hand when I lifted it. I do not know why I thought it belonged to the school. Perhaps it was only coincidence. Yet in that moment, it felt as though the hall itself had dropped me an invitation. I tried the main door. The key resisted, then turned with a groan that seemed too loud for the empty street. I slipped inside, my breath shallow, as though any sound might awaken spirits lingering in the stone. The corridor smelled of wax and paper, the portraits on the walls watching me with painted suspicion. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor until I reached the double doors of the hall. My hand trembled as I slid the key into the lock. Another groan, another turn, and the doors yielded. The sight inside stole the air from my chest. The chandeliers were dark, but enough moonlight streamed through the high windows to paint the seats in silver and shadow. Dust floated in the beams like restless souls. The stage waited, vast and empty, as though holding its breath. I climbed the steps, each creak of the wood startling me, When I stood in the center of the stage, violin under my chin, I felt very small. The hall was so large it seemed to swallow me whole. My bow shook as I drew it across the strings, the first note sharp and thin. It vanished into the vastness, swallowed by silence. But I tried again. Slowly, carefully, I played one of the simple folk songs Father had taught me. The notes trembled at first, then steadied, carrying farther than I expected. They echoed faintly, circling back as though the hall were answering. My heart raced. I played another piece, then another. With each, the hall seemed less empty, less hostile. I imagined the seats filling with faces, imagined their applause, imagined the angels in the fresco above leaning down to listen. Then something happened I cannot fully explain. As I played a hymn we often sang in church, the air grew warmer, or so it felt. A faint vibration stirred through the floorboards beneath my feet, like a low hum. It was not frightening, more like a companion, as though the hall itself had found its voice through my bow. I played until my arms ached. When, at last I stopped, the silence was different, softer, less heavy. I almost believed the hall was grateful. But gratitude was not all it gave me. As I packed my violin, I noticed movement in the shadows near the back of the hall. My throat tightened. I thought at first it was a trick of the moonlight, but then I saw him clearly, a man standing among the last row of seats. He was tall, his coat long, his face pale in the dim light. His hair fell to his shoulders, and in his hand he held what looked like a conductor's baton. He did not move, did not speak. He only watched me. Fear seized me. I bolted, nearly dropping my instrument, and fled through the doors. I ran all. The way home, heart pounding, the image of that silent figure burned into my mind. That night, I did not sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw him, motionless, his gaze fixed on me. Yet when morning came, doubt crept in. Perhaps I had only imagined him, conjured by my own guilty fear of trespassing. Still, the memory gnawed at me. Days passed. I could not stay away. By the following week, I returned. The key still fit, and once again I stood upon the stage. This time, I played louder, testing the hall, daring it to respond. My bow moved with more certainty, my feet grounded as though claiming the space, and again, near the end of my playing, I saw him. He was closer this time, halfway down the aisle. His eyes caught the moonlight, glinting like glass. My stomach twisted with fear, but I forced myself not to flee. My bow shook, but I raised it once more and played a slow, solemn melody. He did not vanish. He did not advance. He only listened. When I finished, I lowered my violin. The man raised his baton slightly, as if in acknowledgement, then faded back into the shadows until he was gone. I left trembling, yet strangely exhilarated. For the first time, I wondered if the rumors of the hall's curse were true. Perhaps the spirit of a benefactor really did linger, waiting for someone brave enough to play. The caretaker noticed me that week. He cornered me outside the gate, his dark eyes narrowing. "You have been inside," he said. It was not a question. I stammered, denying it, but he silenced me with a shake of his head. "Be careful, boy. The hall is not empty. Remember what I told you. It requires bravery." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but he turned and walked away, his coat flapping like the wings of a crow. From that day forward, I knew I could not stop. The hall had chosen me, or I had chosen it. Each visit drew me deeper into its mystery, into the strange bond forming between my bow and its silence. And each time the pale man with the baton came closer. I began to wonder, was he waiting for me to finish a certain piece, a certain phrase, before he would reveal his purpose, and what would happen if I did? The third time I entered the hall, The summer air was so heavy I could feel it pressing against my chest. Prague's streets shimmered with heat, and the bells of St. Nicholas seemed to drip rather than ring. My violin case stuck to the sweat of my palm as I slipped once more through the side door, the old key grinding in the lock. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature changed. The hall was cool, almost damp, as if the thick stone walls had swallowed the heat and hidden it away. Dust floated lazily in the moonlight, and silence lay thick over the velvet seats. I mounted the stage, set my violin beneath my chin, and let the bow draw its first trembling note. That night, I played not just folk songs, but fragments of the great composers, Mozart, Dvorak, even a clumsy attempt at Beethoven's Ode to Joy. The notes rang, faint but persistent, and as always, the emptiness of the hall began to soften as though the walls themselves were listening. And then he appeared. The pale man stood not in the back this time, but in the very center aisle. His coat seemed longer than before, his hair touched with silver. He did not move, but the baton in his hand glimmered faintly, catching the moonlight like a blade. My fingers trembled on the strings. Still, I played on. The melody wavered, but I forced it forward. For the first time, I dared to meet his gaze. His eyes were dark, so dark I could not see where they ended. And though he never spoke, I understood. He was listening not to the music, but to me. When I finished, he raised his baton and gave the smallest nod, as though acknowledging a pupil. My heart leapt, though my skin prickled with fear. Then, just as before, he dissolved into shadow, leaving me alone with the echo of my own notes. I returned home in silence, but my dreams were no longer my own. Each night, I saw him standing. On the stage beside me, his arm lifted as if to conduct. The air around us shimmered, and unseen musicians seemed to breathe, waiting for his command. Yet no sound ever came. I woke with my sheets tangled, sweat on my brow, and the impression that the hall itself was seeping into my sleep. I began to grow secretive. My mother noticed the dark circles beneath my eyes, asked if I was ill. My father grumbled that I practiced too much, but I could not tell them. How could I explain that I was playing not just for myself, not even for the city, but for someone who might not even belong to this world? One afternoon, while delivering varnish to a fellow craftsman, I overheard a story that made my skin crawl. Two men at the shop door were speaking of the music school. "They say the benefactor died before the hall's completion," one said. "A man named Joseph Marek, rich banker, fancied himself a patron of the arts." "Aye," the other replied, "but Marek wasn't just a banker. He wanted to conduct, thought himself the next Smetana, paid for lessons, bought his way into, rehearsals. But no orchestra would accept him. They laughed behind his back. And when he died, sudden in his sleep, they say his ghost stayed behind, waiting for the concert he never got to lead." The men laughed, dismissing it as superstition. But I stood frozen, my heart pounding. Marek. Could it be? Had I truly been standing before the spirit of a failed conductor, condemned to silence? That night, I returned to the hall with a new determination. If Marek wanted music, then I would give it to him. Not scraps, not half-formed melodies, but something worthy. My bow trembled as I launched into one of Dvorak's dances. My arms ached, but I poured into it every bit of life I had. And this time, the pale man did not only listen. He raised his baton. Slowly, with deliberate grace, he began to move it in time with my playing. My bow followed, almost against my will. His motions shaped my rhythm, softened my mistakes, drew from me a sound I had never produced before. The notes leapt, soared, filled the vast chamber as if an unseen orchestra had joined me. When I stopped, gasping, the silence that followed was alive. My whole body shook, not with fear but with a strange exhilaration, as if I had glimpsed a power far beyond me. The pale man lowered his baton, bowed slightly, and vanished into the shadows once more. I stumbled home, the echo of the music still ringing in my ears. I lay awake until dawn, wondering, had I been possessed or guided? Was it my own hand moving or his through me? The caretaker found me the next morning, waiting near the gate. His face was pale, his eyes tired, as if he too had not slept. "You saw him," he said. I nodded. "You should not return," he whispered. "He has chosen you. Do you understand what that means?" I shook my head. The caretaker sighed, glancing up at the tall windows. "Marek was never satisfied. Not in life, not in death. If you let him conduct you, he will not stop. He will push until you play yourself into the grave." His words struck me like a blow. Yet even as he warned me, I knew I could not obey. The hall had become part of me, its silence unbearable without my bow to fill it. And Marek, ghost or not, was the only one who seemed to hear me fully. That evening, I returned again. And again. Each time the pale man came closer, his baton, moving more urgently, shaping me into something greater, something sharper. My music grew bolder, more powerful, until even Father remarked on my sudden progress. But my body weakened. My arms ached constantly. My chest burned when I breathed. My nights were plagued with fevered dreams. Still, I could not stop. I was no longer playing to an empty hall. I was playing to him, and deep inside, I began to fear the caretaker was right, that Marek would never release me. By the end of summer, the hall was no longer a place I visited. It was a place that claimed me. Each night I slipped from home, violin in hand, and each night Marek waited. His pale figure emerged from the shadows as soon as my bow touched the strings. His baton lifted, his arm carved invisible arcs, and I obeyed. My music no longer belonged to me. It was drawn out, shaped, and polished by his unseen hand. Yet there was a strange sweetness to it. Under his direction, I played better than I had ever thought possible. Notes that once stumbled now rang clear. Phrases that had seemed clumsy now flowed with grace. Sometimes when I stopped, I swore I could hear faint echoes of instruments other than my own, as though Marek's orchestra was forming in the emptiness, one ghostly instrument at a time. But with the sweetness came a weight. My body tired quickly. My chest hurt, my arms throbbed, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. Father scolded me for yawning in the workshop. Mother worried that I had grown too pale. I told them nothing. What could I say? That I was rehearsing each night with a ghost who demanded more from me than any living teacher ever could? One evening, as I packed away my violin, the caretaker appeared at the edge of the stage. He looked smaller in the dim light, his face lined with shadows. "You are rehearsing with him," he said quietly. I froze. "You mean Marek?" He nodded. "I warned you, boy. He won't let go. You think you are guiding the bow, but it is he. He is drawing life out of you. One note at a time." I swallowed hard, but my voice came out defiant. "He makes me better. I can play things I never thought possible." "Of course," the caretaker replied bitterly. He was never accepted in life. Now he takes what he could not have, from children like you who are foolish enough to listen. Clutched my violin case, heart pounding. "Then why don't you stop him?" The caretaker laughed, a hollow sound. "Stop him? I was once like you. I played here long ago, when the hall first opened. I felt his baton on my shoulder, but I escaped before he drained me entirely. Now I keep watch, warning those who wander. Too close. Most turn away. You are the first who has stayed." His eyes fixed on me, full of pity. "If you love your music, boy, find a way to play without him. Otherwise, you will not live long enough to see your hair gray." I left shaken, but still I returned the next night. The hall drew me like a flame draws a moth. Marek stood waiting, baton poised, and I obeyed. The caretaker's warnings echoed in my head, but each stroke of Marek's arm filled me with a power I could not resist. The music grew bolder. One night I attempted a full symphonic passage, though I had only a single violin. Marek guided me, his baton moving as though summoning an entire orchestra from the shadows. And in that moment, I swear I heard them. The faint swell of strings, the breath of flutes, the thunder of timpani. My bow moved frantically, faster than my fingers could follow, and yet the sound was whole, complete, magnificent. When I stopped, drenched in sweat, Marek stood at the edge of the stage, his baton lowered. For the first time, he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was thin, sharp, almost triumphant. But it was a smile nonetheless. That smile haunted me more than his silence ever had. The next day, the caretaker found me again. He pressed something into my hand, a small booklet, frayed at the edges. "Marek's diary," he said. "I took it after he died. Read it, if you dare." I hid it under my mattress until nightfall, then opened it by candlelight. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, elegant but fevered. He wrote of his dreams of conducting, of building a hall where his name would live forever. He wrote of his shame when orchestras laughed at him, of his fury when critics dismissed him as a banker who played at art. But near the end, the words grew darker. "If I cannot conduct in life, I will conduct in death. Let the halls stand as my stage. Let the walls keep my silence until a hand is brave enough to lift it. When that day comes, I will return." I closed the diary with shaking hands. He had known. He had planned it. The hall was his trap, and I had walked into it. Yet even knowing this, I could not stay away. The hall was the only place where my music soared, where I felt the greatness Marek had promised. One night, as autumn winds rattled the city's rooftops, Marek did something different. Instead of standing at a distance, he stepped onto the stage beside me. His form was pale, translucent, but his presence chilled the air. He raised his baton high and gestured not to me, but to the empty space behind us. And then, God help me, the orchestra came. I did not see them fully, only flickers, the glint of a bow, the shadow of a horn, the pale outline of a timpani mallet. But I heard them. The hall thundered with sound, every seat vibrating with invisible resonance. My violin joined them, Marek's baton guiding all, and the music surged like a river unleashed. It was glorious, terrifying. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst, but I could not stop. We played as though the concert had been waiting. 100 years for us, and now it was finally here. When the last note crashed into silence, Marek lowered his baton slowly. His eyes met mine, and I felt the weight of his satisfaction. "You are ready," he whispered. The sound of his voice, faint and hollow, made me stumble back. But when I looked again, he was gone. The hall lay silent, the chandeliers cold, the seats empty. Only my violin trembled in my hands, and for the first time I realized Marek was preparing me not just to play. He was preparing me for something larger, something final. The secret rehearsal had only begun. After the night Marek first spoke, I was never the same. His voice was faint, as if carried from another room, yet it struck me with more force than any shout. "You are ready." Those words rang in my ears as I walked the streets of Prague, as I sat at supper, even as I lay awake in the dark. The caretaker's warning, the diary's grim promises, they should have kept me away. Instead, I found myself waiting for nightfall with a hunger I could not explain. I longed for the music, for the way the hall filled with unseen instruments, for the way Marek's baton carved greatness out of my clumsy hands. One evening, Father found me practicing with unusual vigor, his brow furrowed as he listened. "You play like a boy possessed," he muttered, wiping varnish from his fingers. "Your tone is stronger, yes, but there is something unnatural in it. Where do you learn this?" I swallowed, afraid to answer. My mother watched me closely. Her needle paused in the air, but I only said, "I listen. I try to copy the masters." Father shook his head, unconvinced. "Music should lift the heart, not weigh it down. Remember that, boy." But my heart was no longer my own. When I returned to the hall that night, Marek was already waiting at the center of the stage. His baton gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Without a word, he raised it, and I obeyed. The invisible orchestra gathered, their shadows flickering in and out of the air, their sound swelling like a storm. This time, Marek guided me through an entire symphony. My arms burned, my breath caught, my vision blurred, yet I played on. I could not stop. The hall pulsed with sound, alive with music that had not been heard in years. When at last the final note dissolved into silence, Marek lowered his baton, slowly. He turned to me, his eyes hollow yet burning, and whispered again, "It is time." Before I could ask what he meant, I noticed something at my feet, an envelope, pale against the dark wood of the stage. I bent to pick it up, my hands trembling. The parchment was old, the ink faded, but the words were clear, an invitation to perform. October 14th. Midnight. The Grand Hall. No audience required. My chest tightened. October 14th. That was only 3 nights away. My name was written at the bottom, though I had never held the pen. The signature below it was even stranger. Joseph. Marek. I staggered back, clutching the letter. When I looked up, Marek was gone. The hall was empty once more. I left in a daze, the letter burning in my pocket. I wanted to tear it apart, to throw it into the river, but I could not. Each time I tried, my hands froze. It felt less like paper and more like a command carved into my very bones. The next day, the caretaker found me sitting outside the gates, the letter still folded tight in my fist. His eyes fell on it at once. He did not touch it, but his face grew ashen. "So he has chosen the date," he said softly. I asked him what it meant, but he only shook his head. "It means he intends to finish what he began a century ago, the concert that never came. You will not be alone on that stage, boy. Every shadow in that hall will rise with you. And when the music ends..." He did not finish. Fear curled in my stomach, yet so did curiosity. What would happen if I obeyed? Would Marek finally rest? Or would he claim me entirely, body and soul, as his instrument forever? The nights leading up to the 14th were restless. I dreamed of chandeliers blazing with light, of velvet seats filled with faces I could not see, of music so loud it shook the earth. Each time I woke drenched in sweat, the letter lying beside my bed as if it had crept there itself. On the evening of the 13th, Father caught me slipping out with my violin. "Where do you go, boy?" he demanded, his rough hand gripping my shoulder. I stammered something about practice, but he did not believe me. "You have grown pale as chalk. Your fingers tremble. If you don't rest, you'll collapse." Mother's eyes were full of worry, but she said nothing. I could not tell them. How could I? To speak of it aloud would make it real, and I was not yet ready to face that truth. When the 14th arrived, the city seemed to hold its breath. Clouds pressed low over the rooftops, and the river ran dark, swollen with autumn rain. I carried my violin case through the empty streets, the letter in my pocket like a stone. Midnight drew nearer with every step. The school loomed ahead, silent and vast. The key turned easily in the lock, as if the door expected me. The hall was not dark as before. Every chandelier blazed with light, though no candles burned. The air shimmered with a faint hum, as if the music already stirred, waiting for me. I walked to the stage on trembling legs. The invitation lay open on the music stand, though I had left it at home. Marek stood beside it, his pale hand resting. On the edge of the stand, his baton poised in the other. "Welcome," he whispered. Behind him, the shadows thickened. The faint outlines of musicians filled the stage. Cellists, flutists, drummers, an entire orchestra forming from the air itself. Their instruments gleamed faintly, though no hands truly held them. Yet I could feel their presence, heavy and expectant. I raised my violin. The baton lifted, and with it, the concert began. The sound struck me like a wave. My bow leapt across the strings, carried by a force stronger than my own will. The orchestra roared to life, filling the hall with music so fierce, so glorious, that the walls themselves seemed to tremble. I played until my fingers bled, until my arms ached beyond pain. The music was no longer mine. It belonged to Marek, to the hall, to the shadows that surged and swelled around me. As the final movement thundered toward its end, I caught sight of the caretaker standing at the very back of the hall. His face was grim, his hands clasped, as though in prayer. And I knew then, this was not merely a concert, it was a reckoning,